Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Roxan finished her bracelet soon after. When she swung her gaze to the side, she saw Estella's head was still buried over her desk, so she silently sat at her station, waiting for Estella to finish. Miss Jarvis." A while later, Estella's voice rang out beside her. She turned around to see a finished seashell keychain dangling in front of her. Roxan was stunned briefly. Thinking Estella wanted her to comment on her craft, Roxan praised, "It's beautiful." The shell Estella picked up was already pretty and colorful by itself. When Estella attached a blue chain to the shell, the final product looked lovely. It looked good to hang on Essie's bag. Delight filled Roxan's eyes at the thought of Estella walking around carrying a bag with the shell keychain. The next second, Estella's voice rang again. "This is for you." The smile on Roxan's face stiffened for a while before casting a look of disbelief at the little girl. I remembered how happy Estella was when she picked up the seashell. Yet she's willing to part with something she loves so much as a present to me. So she was distressed earlier about that to give me. A hint of guilt surged within Roxan at the realization. I don't know what's so good about me that makes her like me so much. Estella thought Roxan didn't like her present when Roxan didn't respond. Her shoulders slumped, looking crestfallen. "You don't like it, Ms. Jarvis?" "But I did it exactly as Ms. Jarvis told me." Estella's voice pulled Roxan's thoughts back. More guilt surged within her when she caught the sad look on Estella's face. "No. I love it." "Thank you, Essie." Roxan suppressed the guilt in her heart and reached for the keychain in Estella's grip with a smile. Seeing Roxan accepting her present, a smile returned to her face. Roxan carefully kept the keychain in her purse, then reached for the bracelet she made. When she reached onto Estella's wrist, Estella was confused but still lifted her wrist nonetheless. Soon after, she watched as Roxan clasped an exquisite seashell bracelet over her wrist. Estella's eyes sparkled seeing the accessory. Roxan compared Estella's wrist with the length of the bracelet and let out a breath of relief when they lit. "I have a present for you too. Do you like it?" she asked with a smile. Estella nodded her head with her gaze glued to the bracelet and applied the words she learned from Lucian. I love everything Ms. Jarvis gives me." Roxan laughed at her words. "She only learned how to speak recently, yet she already knew how to make me happy with sweet words." Estella was earnest though. She looked down at the bracelet on her wrist, unwilling to tear her gaze away. Seeing how much Estella loved the bracelet, Roxan felt guilty about having to give her cold shoulders in the future. She turned her attention to the boys and noticed that they were still busy. They were working so hard that there was even a thin sheen of sweat on their foreheads. Roxan's curiosity piqued at what the boys were making that deserved their utmost attention. "Hey Archie, Benny, what are you guys making?" Roxan asked after watching them for a while. Maybe she was reading too much into things, but she saw the boys peek at Lucian after she asked them. The boys didn't let Roxan think further when they chorused, "It's a secret." Puzzlement flashed across Roxan's eyes at the boys' answer. It was the first in all the years that they kept a secret from her. Roxan's curiosity heightened at their final product. She started losing track of the time when the boys finally finished their crafts. A glimpse at their finished craft and Roxan was sure about her earlier assumption about the boys stealthily glancing at Lucian. Even Lucian felt their gazes and frowned with confusion. Archie and Benny sneakily hid their crafts in their hands and ran around the workshop searching for something. They stopped in front of a white shell with a fluorescent glow and were relieved when their craft could fit into it after opening it. The shell was for sale, so the boys dug into their pockets for money. After paying for the shell, they cautiously walked over to Lucian. Seeing the boys standing in front of him, the creases on Lucian's forehead deepened. He wondered if the boys were planning to gift him their handicraft. However, he dashed away that thought instantly when he recalled the boys' attitude toward him. Right after he dismissed the idea, the boys shyly lifted the shell in their hands to him. "This is for you, Mr. Farwell." Lucian and Roxan were stunned at the scene. Lucian was confused. "Don't the boys always consider me their enemy? Did last night's incident change their mind? So their perception of me changed just because of that?" Lucian silently pondered the reason for the change in their attitude. The boys' arms were still outstretched with the shell in their hands. They wanted to give Lucian a present, but their expression seemed nervous. After a long while, Roxan reminded, "Mr. Farwell, please accept it, seeing that it's the boys' sweet thought." Roxan cast a complex gaze at the boys. She was beginning to suspect if the boys had found out about their identities. Lucian finally snapped out of his thoughts and took the shell from the boy's hand at Roxan's reminder. He opened the shell and saw a pair of exquisite-looking coal links made of tiny shells sitting in the middle. "So they worked so hard earlier to make this pair of cufflinks for me?" A pang hit Lucian's heart and he asked, "Why would you give me a present?" The boys exchanged a glance and Benny dropped his head shyly while Archie answered, "This is our gratitude for your help in finding Benny yesterday and stopping him from doing something dangerous on the yacht today." Understanding dawned on Lucian and a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "I'll accept this gift then." "Thank you." Archie and Benny exhaled a breath of relief when Lucian accepted their gift. Something indescribable rose within Roxan at the boys' answer. She admitted that Lucian had helped them a lot in the past 2 days and the boys should be grateful to him, but their change in attitude was a complete 180. Roxan was worried that they would grow closer to Lucian and he would soon find out about their identities. It would be hard for her to reject him if Lucian wanted to take them away from her. Fear crept up her out at the thought. "It's getting late." Roxan kept the dread in check as she walked up to the boys. Let's head back." She acted as though nothing was wrong when she reached for the boys' hands and tugged them away from Lucian's side. The boys didn't notice the change in their mother's mood and simply nodded their heads obediently. However, Lucian caught her retreating steps after she took the boys' hands. His expression darkened at the sight. Her intention is obvious. She's worried about the boys getting too close to me. So was she part of the reason for the boys' resentment toward me? Does she hate me so much? Roxan gave him a nod, then tugged the boys over to the counter to settle the bill. She hurriedly led them out of the workshop after, forgetting that Estella was still inside. Estella sat at her station dazed, confused about what had happened. "I just exchanged my present with Ms. Jarvis a while ago, then she already took Archie and Benny away in a blink of an eye, leaving Daddy and me here." Slowly she turned to her father with an assessing gaze, wondering if he made Roxan angry again. Lucian sensed her gaze and felt his head aching. "Essie, come on. We should be heading back too." I'm used to getting the cold shoulders from Roxan, Archie, and Benny, but now even my own daughter is taking their side and suspecting that I was the cause of Roxan's change of mood. Estella pouted as she dragged her feet over to Lucian's side. Lucian reached for her hand but did not get her. Dipping his gaze, he saw Estella grasping onto the hem of his shirt in a depressed mood. Her gaze lingered at the door where the trio left. Lucian's brows furrowed at her look but still led her after them. They needed to pass through the beach to get back to their rooms. It was the busiest time on the beach. Even though the crowd was smaller compared to the night before with the firework display, Roxan and Lucian still kept a close watch on the children. Daddy." Estella yanked on the hem of her father's shirt roughly when Roxan didn't look over her shoulder at her even once. Lucian dropped his gaze as he could not read what was on Roxan's mind. Estella glared at him as she asked, "Did you make Ms. Jarvis mad again?" Lucian's eyelid twitched at her interrogation. "Well, I was right. She's blaming me." Lucian stayed silent for a few seconds to suppress his feeling before he asked, "Didn't you see what happened earlier? Do you think I was the one who made her angry?" Estella contemplated with a frown at her father's rebuttal. She slowly shook her head. "I can't think of anything you did that would make her angry. All Daddy did was accept Archie's and Benny's presents, then Miss Jarvis took them away. That can't be Daddy's fault." Lucian nodded and swung his dark gaze at the woman walking in front of him. "I can't think of anything too. Everything was going well, but after I accepted the boys' presents." Roxanne's expression changed, and she hurriedly took the boys away. She even left Essie there. Does she want the boys to keep their distance from me so badly? Both Archie and Benny were holding hands with Roxanne as they walked. Roxanne had been silent the entire way, and the twins couldn't help but worry for her. They had no idea what happened, but they could tell that all of a sudden their mother was unhappy. Mommy," Benny cautiously called out to her. Are we not taking Essie with us anymore?" Roxanne snapped back to reality when she heard him. She then remembered that she had forgotten about Estella due to her fear. However, it was not possible for her to go back to pick the young child up then. Roxanne hesitated for a while before caressing Benny's head. "Mr. Farewell will bring Essie home." Archie and Benny nodded at that. "Mommy, why are you sad? Weren't we having loads of fun just now?" they couldn't help but ask. Although they had been focusing on doing artwork, they were aware that Estella and their mother had exchanged gifts with each other. Roxanne should have been happy about it. However, she seemed to be in a panic instead. Archie frowned as he looked up at his mother. "Is it because we gave Mr. Farwell a gift?" A look of astonishment flashed in her eyes as she was taken aback by his words. Archie gripped Roxanne's hand tightly. Now that he had found out about his family background, he naturally knew what his mother was worried about. "We gave Mr. Farwell gifts because he had helped us out a lot these 2 days," Archie said with a serious expression. "If you don't like it, we will avoid Mr. Farwell in the future, Mommy." Benny joined in as well. "We love you the most, Mommy. We won't like anyone you don't." Although those words were what they said, they still felt saddened. They had been happily spending time with Lucian during these few days. The latter had been taking good care of them as well. If it was possible, Archie and Benny wanted their parents to get back together. However, Roxanne obviously did not think the same way. Therefore, the twins could only respect her wishes. Roxanne was moved by their words, but she did not want them to know that she was afraid. She could not show that she was fearful. Upon listening to her children, she pursed her lips and smiled. "Mommy loves you too the most too." Archie and Benny smiled sweetly at her. Benny, however, could not help but look back. Just as he did, his eyes met Estella's aggrieved gaze. When their gazes met, Benny quickly tugged at Roxanne's hand. "Mommy, Essie's behind us. Should we wait for her?" Roxanne instinctively turned back to look as well. However, she ended up locking eyes with Lucian, who had an unfathomable look. Her heart clenched and she quickly looked away, not even sparing Estella a glance. "There's no need for that. Mr. Farwell is there with her," she told Archie and Benny as she turned back around. Roxanne tried to suppress the panic inside her. Because Benny noticed the sad look on Estella's face, he wanted to say something further. Moreover, Roxanne might start avoiding Estella again after returning from the trip. He had been hoping that Estella would be able to spend more time with Roxanne. Regardless, when he noticed Roxanne's expression, he could only keep quiet. Suddenly, Roxanne halted in her tracks and turned around to face the duo behind her. Noticing her movements, Lucian and Estella stopped walking. please go on ahead and take the children back, Mr. Farwell. I want to stay here for a while, Roxanne said with a distant look. When she thought of how she had to stay under the same roof with Lucian after returning to the hotel, her heart was filled with mixed feelings. After mulling it over, Roxanne decided to remain on the beach to calm down. Lucian's eyebrows furrowed as he glanced at the twins next to her. We're going to stay with Mommy. Both of them held Roxanne's hands tightly. Roxanne had no other choice but to let her children stay with her. She then said to Lucian, you can go on ahead and take Estella home, Mr. Farwell. The kids and I will go back after a while. Lucian could notice Estella tugging the ends of his shirt strongly. It was clear that she did not want to leave as well. However, Roxanne had already turned around to leave with Archie and Benny. Ms. Jarvis. Estella looked at Roxanne sadly. Lucian's gaze darkened. In the end, he still worried for the three of them, but he knew that Roxanne would not want him and Estella to tag along. Hence, he decided to take Estella to a nearby restaurant to wait for them. Roxanne, on the other hand, brought Archie and Benny over to a place that was not as crowded. She took off her shoes and sat down on the sand. With the refreshing sea breeze blowing on her face, she soon started to calm down. Archie and Benny remained by her side. As they could tell that Roxanne was not in a good mood, they did not dare to play around and instead sat down quietly next to her. It was after a long while that Roxanne had calmed down finally. She then stood up and rubbed the boys' heads. Let's go. Realizing that their mother looked much better, they both breathed a sigh of relief. They held on to Roxanne's hand and made a move to stand up. Roxanne was about to pull them up when she suddenly felt a sharp pain underneath her foot. She made a sound of pain when something seemed to have scraped her foot. Both Archie and Benny were shocked at her sudden reaction. They quickly stood up and patted the sand off their clothes before helping Roxanne to sit back down on the beach. What's wrong, Mommy? Roxanne tried her best to endure the pain as she looked down at the spot that she had been standing on. All she saw was a shell silently laying on the sand. There were traces of her blood on the sharp edge of the shell. Archie and Benny looked at where their mother was staring and instantly noticed the blood-stained shell. Mommy, you're hurt. Realizing that she had worried her children, Roxanne forced a smile. It's all right. Help me up, she tried to comfort them. However, both Archie and Benny promptly declined. You're hurt. How are you going to stand up? The twins did not know what to do. In the midst of their anxiousness, Lucian was the first person that popped into their minds. Archie lightly tugged at his brother and whispered next to his ear, I'm going to find Daddy. Take care of Mommy. Benny nodded. Mommy, I'm going to get someone to help us. Archie said to Roxanne before running away without looking back. Roxanne worriedly tried to stop the young boy from leaving, but the latter did not even turn back as he walked away. Don't worry, Mommy. Archie won't get lost. We're very smart, Benny comforted her. Since Archie had already run too far off, Roxanne could only calm down and direct Benny on how to do some simple disinfection. On the other hand, Lucian was staring in the direction of where Roxanne and the boys had left. An uncomfortable feeling rose in his heart. Suddenly, Estella tugged at his shirt and exclaimed, It's Archie. She pointed toward the crowd as she spoke. Lucian looked in the direction of her finger and noticed Archie running toward the hotel. Seeing that, Lucian's gaze darkened. He picked Estella up with one hand and strode over to the young boy. Why are you alone? Where are Benny and your mother? Archie skidded to a stop, panting. He grabbed onto Lucian's clothes and started explaining in a tense voice, Mommy's hurt. Hurry up and come with me, Mr. Farwell. Hearing Archie's words, Lucian's face instantly darkened. Where is she? Take us there. Archie instantly ran toward the beach. With Estella in his arms, Lucian followed in long strides behind the boy. Roxanne was still worried about Archie, who had run off alone. After a while, she gently said to Benny, "Help me up, Benny. Let's go look for Archie." However, the latter shook his head without hesitation. "You're hurt, Mommy. You can't move. Archie will bring someone over soon." Roxanne's eyebrows furrowed slightly at Benny's reaction. "I'm worried for Archie. Although I know that both of you are more than capable to take care of yourselves, I'll still be worried," she patiently tried to convince him. Listening to his mother's words, Benny seemed to hesitate. He did not want Roxanne's injury to worsen, but he also did not want her to worry for them. Just as Benny was contemplating listening to his mother and helping her up, Archie's voice could be heard from afar. Mommy. Mommy. I've brought someone," he shouted as he breathed heavily. Roxanne immediately heaved a sigh of relief when she heard Archie. Thank goodness he did not get lost, and he actually brought someone over to help. "I'm sorry for bothering you. My kids are worried because I've been lightly injured." Roxanne quickly apologized politely, even though she could not clearly see who had arrived. The words had barely left her mouth when she heard Estella's voice. "Miss Jarvis." She sounded as though she was on the verge of crying. Roxanne was instantly stunned as a ridiculous thought flashed across her mind. But the very next second, Estella's tiny figure appeared within her line of vision. Roxanne subconsciously looked behind Estella. Under the moonlight, all she could see was Lucian's tall figure walking over in big strides. Her words got caught in her throat as she stared at the man walking over. She did not know how to react at that moment. Her previous attempts on avoiding Lucian must have been noticed by him as well. However, in just a sudden turn of events, she found herself relying on him once again. Mixed feelings rose within her heart. Both Archie and Estella quickly ran over to her. Estella looked at Roxanne with worry evident in her eyes. Her gaze then landed on Roxanne's foot. "Ms. Jarvis, is your leg hurt?" she asked in a soft voice. As she spoke, Estella crouched down and carefully touched the skin surrounding the wound. When she looked back at Roxanne, Estella's eyes had reddened and there were tears welling up in them. Roxanne rushed to comfort the young girl. "I'm fine. I stepped on a shell and it cut my skin. I'll just have to bandage the wound and it will heal quickly in just 2 days. Don't be afraid, Essie." Estella bit her lip while her face was filled with worry. She looked up at her father and said, "Daddy, Miss Jarvis' foot." Lucian had already walked over to them and had noticed the wound on Roxanne's leg. He remained quiet all the while. It was until Estella called out to him that he stopped staring at Roxanne's injured foot. He looked over at the woman who was still sitting on the sand. Roxanne, too, subconsciously looked at the man next to her. As their eyes met, Roxanne blinked and quickly averted her eyes. Instead, she smiled nonchalantly and said, "The wound isn't too deep. I'm sorry for troubling you. The kids were too anxious and went to look for you. I'm actually all right on my own." As she spoke, she turned to look at the twins next to her. Archie, Benny, help me up," she said in a slightly serious tone. Both Archie and Benny already noticed that their mother was trying to avoid Lucian, but they were more worried that her injury might get worse. Upon hearing Roxanne's instructions, they looked at each other hesitantly. Even after a short pause, the boys remained standing still. The atmosphere turned awkward. Noticing that her children weren't making a move, Roxanne fell into a dilemma. She thought that Lucian had already returned to the hotel with Estella. Therefore, even though Archie ran off to find help, Roxanne had assumed that he would bring a stranger back. She did not expect for him to drag Lucian back here. Roxanne was trying to act tough in front of them, but Archie and Benny weren't allowing her to do that. In the end, they did not make a move to help her at all. No one made a move for a while. Roxan gritted her teeth and placed a hand on the ground in order to push herself up. Lucian seemed to have noticed what she was about to do, for a look of displeasure flashed across his eyes. Roxan's movements froze. In the next moment, Lucian made a move. Under Roxan's gaze, he walked over to her and bent over to take hold of her ankle. She instinctively tried to avoid his touch, but she was too slow. Lucian had seized hold of her ankle and raised it up. Feeling his fingers brush across her wound, Roxan reflexively tried to pull her leg back, and Lucian also let go of her ankle at the same time. Just as she was about to breathe a sigh of relief, Lucian stood back up and walked over to her side. He seemed to have noticed something, for his brows furrowed. In a fluid motion, he took off his coat. Roxan frowned at the sight. "I thank you for your kindness, Mr. Farwell, but I'm not cold." However, Lucian ignored her protests and sternly placed his coat over her shoulders. "You're hurt, Miss Jarvis. The children are already so worried, and if you catch a cold, Essie might start crying again." Upon hearing that, Roxan's lips quivered, but she could not say anything to turn him down. Lucian suddenly moved to shorten the distance between them. Roxan could clearly feel his large hand pressing onto her waist. He then swiftly carried her up. She instinctively grabbed onto Lucian's shirt in order to balance herself. "I can walk just fine. You just need to support me," Roxan said adamantly after recovering from her initial shock. Then, she struggled to get down. The children were all looking at them. She shouldn't be so intimate with Lucian. However, Lucian refused to let that happen. All Roxan felt was his hand tightening on her waist. "You're a doctor, Miss Jarvis. Aren't you afraid that your wound would get infected if it comes into contact with dust and seawater?" His low voice rang next to her ears. Before Roxan could even react, the children started to panic. "Mommy, your feet shouldn't touch the ground." "And Miss Jarvis?" Estella's voice was full of concern. Roxan hesitated upon realizing that the kids were too worried about her to notice the intimate actions between her and Lucian. She then decided to keep quiet and obediently lay in Lucian's arms. Since Lucian had given her his coat, all he was wearing underneath was a thin shirt. In order to stabilize herself, Roxan placed a hand on Lucian's chest. She could clearly feel the warmth radiating from him. Maybe it was just her imagination, but that heat seemed to have warmed her up as well. Even her face started to flare up. Lucian basically carried her across the beach. Roxan, however, could feel everyone staring on her. There were even some people gossiping about them. They were all discussing the couple who were publicly displaying their affection. Noticing the commotion around her, Roxan buried her head against Lucian's chest, trying her absolute best to hide to avoid everyone's gaze. Lucian noticed how she was behaving, and his hands that were carrying her tightened. The three children all tugged Lucian's clothes as they followed after him. Their eyes were locked onto the woman in his arms. Lucian carried Roxan all the way to a nearby clinic. Once they arrived, he carefully placed her down on the chair. It was clear that the clinic's doctor had dealt with such injuries before, for he was advising Roxan as he cleaned her wound. "It's comfortable to run on the beach without shoes, but it'll be hard to see what's hidden in the sand at night. Please be more careful in the future." Roxan agreed as her face reddened slightly in embarrassment. "It's not a serious injury, but you have to take good care of it. Be careful when you walk during these 2 days, and try not to apply pressure on it. Furthermore, the wound must not get wet," the doctor reminded her after he was done. Roxan's eyebrows were furrowed as she tried to endure the pain. Before she could even react to the doctor's advice, Lucian, who had been by her side, answered on her behalf, "All right. Thank you, doctor." The doctor thought that they were married, and thus he sincerely advised Lucian, "Go home and take good care of your wife. It'll be hard for her to move around with a leg injury." Upon hearing that, Roxan instinctively tried to explain, "You've misunderstood. We're not." "I will," Lucian interrupted in a low voice. Seeing both of their reactions, the doctor chuckled knowingly. "Are you fighting with each other? If you two weren't married, why was there such a grand entrance?" "I was cleaning your wound, but this man seemed to be more anxious than you are." Roxan frowned slightly as she looked up at the man next to her. A look of confusion flashed across her eyes. Lucian, on the other hand, nodded and made his way to settle the bill with the doctor. He then came back to her. Noticing that he was bending over her, Roxan's body stiffened and was about to push him away. "I can walk." Just as she spoke, she had already been carried up into the air. Roxan made a soft sound of surprise as she grabbed onto his strong arm subconsciously. The doctor stood by the side as he saw the scene unfold. A knowing smile appeared on his face. Roxan frowned, but she knew that she would not be able to break through Lucian's. Therefore, she stopped struggling and awkwardly smiled at the doctor, allowing Lucian to carry her out of the clinic. The three children carried Roxan's shoes and bag as they quickly walked behind Lucian. Once they arrived at the hotel, Lucian had just placed Roxan down on the couch when all three of them quickly surrounded her. "Mommy." Roxan was still having mixed feelings about what happened until she saw the worried look on their faces. She forced a comforting smile at them. "I'm okay. It's just a small injury. Didn't you hear the doctor just now? All I have to do is to rest for 2 days. It was my fault for being careless. There's no need to blame yourselves." The three children pouted as sadness was written all over their faces. "Pack your things up. We're going home," Lucian's voice rang out from the side. The three children instantly nodded obediently and ran upstairs to pack their bags. Roxan, however, had her eyebrows furrowed in disagreement. "Weren't we supposed to go to the hot springs? The main objective of their trip here was to the hot springs." Lucian frowned at her. "You're already injured. How are you supposed to go to the hot springs?" "Even if I can't go, the kids can. You should take them there. I can wait here. They shouldn't end the trip early because I'm injured." Roxan looked at the stairs where the children had run off to. Lucian rejected coldly, "We can always come back next time." With that, he left no room for Roxan to object and went upstairs to help the children to pack their belongings. The group soon left the hotel in the middle of the night and headed back to the city. It was different from how they arrived. On the way home, Archie sat in the front passenger seat in order to allow Roxan to sit comfortably while Estella and Benny accompanied Roxan in the back seat. All three children kept staring at her injured foot, and Roxan did not know whether to laugh or cry at that. They finally arrived at the entrance of the mansion. With her hand on the car seat to support her, Roxan carefully tried to get out of the car. Just as she reached the door, a pair of big hands reached out and were placed on her waist, carrying her up. Roxan was stunned for a few seconds. However, after realizing that the kids had already seen this happen many times after she got injured and probably wouldn't think much of it, there was no need for her to reject Lucian. Therefore, she allowed him to carry her into the mansion. Just as they entered, Lisa walked over to meet them. When she saw that Roxan was in Lucian's arms, her eyes were filled with surprise. "What's going on? Are you sick, Miss Jarvis?" The children rushed to explain, "Mommy hurt her foot." Upon hearing that, Lisa looked at Roxan's feet with worry evident in her eyes. She noticed that a shoe was dangling off one of the latter's feet and there was gauze wrapped around it. Lisa's face was full of worry as she helped Lucian to place Roxan down on the couch. "How did you injure yourself so badly?" she asked in concern. Roxan responded with a comforting smile. "I accidentally scraped my foot on a seashell. It's not a big deal. It'll heal after resting at home for 2 days." Regardless, the worried expression on Lisa's face did not fade. "It's fortunate that you were there with Ms. Jarvis, Mr. Farwell. Thank you for sending her back even though it's so late," she thanked Lucian. Lucian nodded and replied, "Please take good care of her these 2 days, try not to let her walk, and keep her wound dry." Lisa agreed at once. A weird feeling rose in Roxanne's heart when she noticed that Lucian was acting like the head of the house. "It's getting late. You should take Essie home soon, Mr. Farwell." "I'll thank you properly for everything you did today," she piped up. Her words triggered a grim expression on Lucian's face. Even though they had been interacting a lot these 2 days, Roxanne was still cold to him. He had already gone to such lengths for her, and yet she was still trying to push him as far away as possible. Estella cast her gaze downward. She carefully tugged onto Roxanne's shirt and said, "Ms. Jarvis, I want to stay with you," she said with a pleading expression. She was really worried about Roxanne's wound. Roxanne's heart softened at the sight, but she still stayed firm on her decision. "It be good, Essie. It's late. Go home with Daddy." "But you're hurt." Estella looked up at her with tears welling in her eyes. Roxanne's heart ached terribly. She knew that the young girl was incredibly worried for her, but she knew that she had to maintain a distance from both Lucian and Estella. Before Roxanne could even reply, Estella sniffled. She was about to burst into tears soon. "If you're worried about me, you can come and visit me another day, Essie." After a few seconds of silence, Roxanne still caved in. Estella looked at her with doubtful eyes. "Really? I can come?" she questioned with a sob. A sorrowful feeling filled Roxanne's heart as she patted Estella on her head. "Yes," she said firmly. Hearing Roxanne's promise, Estella longingly nodded and went to hold Lucian's hand. Lucian looked at the woman sitting on the couch. Although he was displeased with her words, he didn't say anything more. After bidding them a simple goodbye, he left with Estella. As Roxanne was injured, she remained sitting on the couch. It was until the door of the mansion was closed that Roxanne could finally heave a sigh of relief. She was still in a daze after what happened. She recalled the events from these 2 days. It felt as if everything was a dream. After 6 years apart, she found herself living under the same roof with Lucian again. She had even told him of her feelings from 6 years ago. Moreover, Lucian's attitude toward her confused her sometimes. It was as if he liked her. Snapping back to reality, Roxanne could not help but laugh at herself for having such thoughts. Mommy." Archie cautiously tugged on her clothes. Roxanne returned to her senses and tiredly looked at her children. Archie had a worried expression on his face when he noticed how pale his mother looked. Are you tired? We'll help you to your room to rest." Roxanne nodded. "Actually, I am quite tired." As she had been stuck with Lucian for 2 days, she had constantly been in a tense state. After getting injured, Roxanne felt even more exhausted. Now that Lucian had left, there was no need for her to put up a front anymore. Lisa, who was standing by the side, walked up to Roxanne when she heard her. "I'll help you up the stairs," she said as she reached out to support Roxanne. Roxanne smiled gratefully at her as she pushed on the couch to get up. After she had gotten wounded, Lucian had been carrying her everywhere. It was only when she had to walk by herself that she realized how troublesome it was. Even though Lisa was supporting her, it was hard for her to walk when she could not put any pressure on one of her feet. After Roxanne slowly made her way to the stairs, she looked up at the many steps and laughed helplessly. "I just stay down here for the moment." Lisa then brought her to the guest room on the lower floor. Her heart ached for Roxanne. It was fortunate that she was there to take care of the latter. Lisa had no idea how Roxanne took care of 2 kids all alone. She could not imagine how hard things must have been whenever Roxanne fell sick and still had to care for her 2 sons. Archie and Benny trailed behind their mother and Lisa. Roxanne sat down on the side of the bed and said to her twins in a soft voice, "It's late. You two should head to bed now." However, the boys pursed their lips and shook their heads. "Oh, we want to be with you, Mommy." If Roxanne needed water in the middle of the night, they would be able to help her. "There's no need for that. I can take care of myself." Roxanne chuckled. Lisa piped up, "I'll stay here tonight and take care of Ms. Jarvis. All you two need to do is to take good care of yourselves." Archie and Benny hesitated for a long while before slowly nodding. Lisa brought them upstairs to rest and came down after a while. She then helped Roxanne to wash up and brought over a mattress next to the bed. After turning off the lights, Lisa suddenly asked, "What's going on between you and Mr. Farwell, Ms. Jarvis? He seems to care for you a lot." Roxanne was already pretty unsettled due to the events that had happened, so when she heard Lisa's question, the sleepiness in her instantly flew out the window. She forced a smile and replied, "We're only acquaintances. It was just a coincidence that Estella is friends with Archie and Benny." Although Lisa was still suspicious about the situation, she knew better than to continue questioning Roxanne. Silence soon filled the house. Roxanne's eyes were wide open as she looked at the ceiling above her. Multiple images flashed across her mind. It mostly consisted of times when people had misunderstood her relationship with Lucian these 2 days. Even Lisa was suspicious of them. "It seems like I have to maintain a distance from him." Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.